In a quiet courtroom in Charleston, South Carolina, a single slap ignited a storm that would shake the pillars of power. What began as an ordinary day quickly unraveled into a national reckoning when a quiet black woman was assaulted in her own courtroom, and the world discovered she wasn't just any woman, she was the judge. Judge Evelyn Brooks, dignified, fearless, and fed up, stood not only for herself, but for generations who had been silenced by the system. This is more than a story about one moment of violence. It's about courage, truth, and the unstoppable rise of justice. If you believe in standing up against corruption and honoring those who fight for what's right, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Tap the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this. The fight for justice begins with awareness, and it starts right here. The morning sun spilled through the tall courthouse windows in Charleston, South Carolina, casting long shadows across the marble floors. The building buzzed with the usual rhythm of motions, arraignments, and quiet bureaucracy. But inside courtroom 3B, something unusual was brewing. Judge Evelyn Brooks, 61, had arrived early, well before donning her black judicial robe. Known for her calm strength and unshakable integrity, she often preferred to enter her courtroom quietly, observing the space before taking the bench. This morning was no different, except for the tension that hung thick in the air. The docket was supposed to be routine, a juvenile arraignment for minor vandalism. But standing at the prosecution table was Officer Derek Slater, 46, a third-generation cop with a record of complaints buried deeper than the city's archives. His posture was stiff, arms crossed, his smirk as rehearsed as it was offensive. His eyes scanned the room like it belonged to him. Slater was flanked by another uniformed officer, equally arrogant, both unaware of the storm they were about to unleash on themselves. Judge Brooks entered quietly from the side door, dressed in a plain charcoal suit. She moved toward the clerk's table to glance over the file. Just another formality, she thought. But before she could even open the folder, Slater barked across the room. "Hey, you! We're not taking questions from the gallery today. Back off." She looked up, surprised. "Excuse me?" Slater strode over, clearly irritated. "You're not authorized to be up here. Step back before I have you removed." Brooks didn't move. Her eyes, sharp and composed, met his. "I believe you're mistaken, officer." But Slater wasn't interested in conversation. With a visible sneer, he stepped closer. And then it happened. His hand snapped out, fast and loud. A slap across her face that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. The entire room froze. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The public defender gasped. A coffee cup dropped and shattered on the floor behind the gallery bench. The teenager on trial looked horrified. Two attorneys at the rear stood in disbelief. But Judge Brooks, she didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head back to Slater, her cheeks stinging, eyes locked on his with a calm that was terrifying. "You just assaulted a sitting judge," she said, her voice low but crystal clear. Slater blinked, confused. "You're what?" The bailiff, Marcus Hill, 55, rushed forward from the corner where he'd been monitoring quietly. His hand moved toward his holster, not to draw but out of reflex, as he stepped protectively beside the judge. A murmur spread through the room. Someone whispered, "That's Judge Brooks." From the back corner, the red light of the surveillance camera blinked, silently recording it all. The silence didn't last long. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. The entire courthouse was about to feel the impact of one reckless, racist act. A slap that would reverberate far beyond the marble walls it had echoed within. The courtroom buzzed with an odd, unsettled quiet after the slap landed. Officer Derek Slater stood frozen, his hands still tingling, his breath shallow and chest slightly puffed, like a dog who just growled at the wrong shadow. The soft murmur of shuffling papers and whispered confusion filled the air behind him, but Slater didn't seem to hear any of it. His focus remained squarely on the woman he'd just struck. A woman who, moments earlier, he assumed was some clerk or spectator getting in his way. But the stillness in her posture, the deliberate, unflinching way she held her chin, immediately felt off. Evelyn Brooks didn't stagger. She didn't shout or threaten. She simply turned to face him with a stare so measured and direct, it might have cut granite. Her brown eyes, clear and stern, locked onto his with a force that seemed to grow larger than the room. "Is this how you treat every black woman who doesn't flinch when you raise your voice, Officer Slater?" she asked, voice cool and precise. Slater blinked. For a half second, his lips parted, then closed again. He was searching for something, an excuse, a justification, anything, but nothing came. From the back of the courtroom, a ripple of tension passed through the spectators. Marcus Hill, the bailiff who had worked beside Judge Brooks for nearly a decade, stood silently near the double doors. His fists were clenched, but his expression was unreadable. He knew this was not his moment to act. Not yet. Slater straightened. I didn't know who you were," he said. His voice wavered ever so slightly, and his tone had shifted from smug to uncertain. Evelyn didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped forward, heels clicking once on the marble tile. Then again. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand attention. She simply walked with the quiet certainty of someone reclaiming ground that had always belonged to her. She ascended the bench. Every inch of that rise was a revelation. The gallery stilled, eyes wide, breaths held. Even the clerk's pen stopped mid-stroke. Slater stood motionless, his face tightening, his spine going rigid as the truth landed like a thunderclap. She turned at the top, standing behind the bench. Her hands calmly adjusted the nameplate already there. Honorable Evelyn Brooks, presiding judge. Gasps burst from the back rows like popcorn. A defense attorney whispered, "Oh my God!" Another voice near the press box stammered, "She's the judge." Slater's face went pale. The realization was dawning fast and violent. He hadn't smacked a bystander. He hadn't barked orders at a staffer. He had assaulted the highest-ranking official in the room. The silence was suddenly deafening. Judge Brooks tapped the wooden gavel once, gently but with precision. "Officer Derek Slater," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the thick air. "You will explain to this court why you laid your hand on a member of the judiciary." Slater stepped forward instinctively, but Marcus Hill took a sharp step out from the wall, his presence alone enough to halt him mid-stride. "You weren't wearing your robe," Slater said weakly. "I didn't realize that I was the judge, or that a black woman could be." The question didn't need an answer. The courtroom held its breath. Slater stood there, shoulders hunched, unable to look at her fully. The smirk he always wore had vanished. In its place, confusion, fear, and an unraveling ego. Judge Brooks didn't blink. "You've spent a career hiding behind assumptions, Officer Slater. Today, they failed you." Behind him, someone had already pulled out their phone. Cameras weren't just pointed at her, they were pointed at him. The entire scene was now evidence. "I suggest," she continued, calm and poised, "you sit down and wait to be addressed further, because this courtroom isn't under your command. And today, neither is your future." She let that hang in the air. Slater finally sat, not because she ordered it, but because every part of him knew he no longer had control. Judge Evelyn Brooks had arrived, not just as a woman wronged, but as the law itself. And she had just made it very, very clear who held the gavel, and who would soon feel the weight of it. The courtroom was silent, but the tension hung thick in the air like a summer storm about to break. Officer Derek Slater stood rigid, eyes darting around the room as the weight of what he'd just done slowly began to settle. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of thinly veiled panic. Judge Evelyn Brooks sat behind the bench now, calm and composed, her hands folded neatly as if she were presiding over any ordinary case. But this was anything but ordinary. The red mark on her cheek had faded slightly, but it was still visible. An open wound to the authority of the court and to the dignity of the woman who had served it for over 3 decades. "Officer Slater," Judge Brooks said with an even tone, "you are hereby placed under formal judicial investigation for assaulting a public official, specifically a sitting judge, in the execution of her duties. This hearing is now suspended pending further action." Slater's jaw clenched. "I didn't know who you were," he muttered under his breath. "That excuse," she replied coolly, "does not absolve the violence. If anything, it reveals the depth of your assumptions." Her bailiff, Marcus Hill, moved quietly into position by the side of the courtroom, his stance protective, his expression unreadable. He had worked alongside Judge Brooks for nearly 20 years. He had seen angry defendants, disrespectful attorneys, even threats outside the courthouse. But this, an attack inside the courtroom from a sworn officer, was a first. Judge Brooks turned to the clerk. "Make sure that security footage is preserved and backed up to multiple sources. Forward it to Internal Affairs in the Department of Justice immediately." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Reporters had begun texting. Attorneys whispered to each other. The other officer who had accompanied Slater had already moved back against the wall, keeping his eyes on the floor, distancing himself from the unfolding disaster. "Marcus," the judge continued, "escort Officer Slater to holding room B. He is not to leave this courthouse until Internal Affairs arrives." Slater stiffened. "You can't do that. I have rights." "You have privileges," Brooks interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp as steel. "And those privileges do not include striking a judge. You'll be treated with the professionalism your badge once stood for. But do not mistake that for leniency." Slater hesitated as Marcus approached. His usual bravado was gone now. He looked around the courtroom for someone, anyone, to intervene. But none came. As Marcus led him out, Judge Brooks took a deep breath. She turned to the bailiff still standing at the back of the room. "Notify Internal Affairs. Request agents Naomi Clark and Jordan Vega by name. Tell them this case is about to shake some roots." Within the hour, both agents had arrived. Naomi Clark entered first, tall, focused, and no nonsense. She had built her reputation on exposing corruption in departments that thought themselves untouchable. Behind her followed Agent Jordan Vega, sharp-eyed and armed with a tablet he was already using to pull records, security footage, and personnel files. Brooks greeted them with a nod. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Clark responded with a tight smile. "When a federal judge gets assaulted on camera, we don't waste time." Jordan Vega plugged into the courtroom's surveillance system. "Footage is intact, multiple angles, crystal clear audio. This won't just be a report, it'll be a documentary." Judge Brooks allowed herself a brief, tight smile. "Then let's make sure it tells the truth." She led the two agents into her chambers, where Marcus Hill had already prepared a file containing Slater's known history, at least what had survived official reporting channels. But Brooks had kept her own records over the years. She had watched Slater's name appear in complaint after complaint. Excessive force, racial profiling, verbal abuse, all dismissed, sealed, or quietly resolved. "We'll need full access to his personnel file," Clark said, flipping through the papers. "But this gives us a strong foundation." "And you'll have it," Brooks replied. "But I want to go further. I want to know who protected him, who dismissed those reports, who signed off on closing them." Clark exchanged a glance with Vega. "Then we'll need subpoenas." "You'll have them by morning," Brooks said. "I've already spoken with the chief administrative judge for the state. I'm invoking emergency judicial authority under Title 28. That gives you full cooperation from this district." Clark leaned forward. "Judge Brooks, with all due respect, you're not just investigating a rogue officer. You're going after a system." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Brooks said firmly, "and I'm not stopping." The slap that echoed through the courtroom hadn't just bruised Judge Evelyn Brooks' cheek. It had cracked the seal on something far more sinister. In the days following the assault, the public frenzy had begun to stir, but Evelyn stayed focused, steady. The real storm, she knew, wasn't the act of violence itself, but what that act revealed about who felt untouchable and why. In her chambers, the air was thick with purpose. The wooden blinds were drawn shut, papers stacked in organized chaos, a large legal pad open in front of her. Marcus Hill, her longtime bailiff, stood by the door like a statue of discipline, eyes sharp. Agent Naomi Clark, Internal Affairs' most formidable investigator, sat across the table in a black suit, arms folded. Agent Jordan Vega, younger but no less determined, was bent over a laptop, his fingers dancing across keys as data scrolled in rapid succession. "We found something," Naomi began, her voice calm but loaded with weight. "Slater didn't just lose body cam footage. It was deliberately mislabeled in the server logs. And it's not just one file, it's several, over a span of years." Jordan didn't look up. 7 body cam files, gone, all tied to Officer Derek Slater, all incidents involving young black men. 3 ended in hospitalizations, 1 in death. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her pen. "And that's just the start," Naomi continued. "We've traced internal complaint files that were sealed unusually fast, sometimes within 24 hours. No follow-up interviews. Dozens." "Sealed by whom?" Evelyn asked, though she already had a gnawing suspicion. Naomi tapped the file folder. "Ada Bradley Kent, every single one." A hollow silence followed. Evelyn's jaw clenched. "I remember Kent from my prosecutor days. Always quick to strike a deal, always deferential to uniformed officers. I used to think it was just a tactic. But this is strategy. Collusion." Jordan turned his laptop. "It gets worse. Slater's disciplinary record shows prior recommendations for suspension that never materialized." "Let me guess," Marcus muttered. "Buried." Jordan nodded. "By then, Captain Leonard Whitaker, Slater's mentor. And before you ask, yes, Whitaker was the one who wrote Slater's glowing commendation before his promotion." Evelyn's stomach sank. Whitaker was retired now, living quietly in Isle of Palms. He'd once been a respected name in Charleston law enforcement. She'd even hosted him in her courtroom. They'd exchanged speeches at legal conferences. And now, piece by piece, the mask was falling. "I'm not done," Naomi added grimly. "We cross-referenced Judge Craftoff's dockets during his final 2 years before retirement. At least 9 cases involved Slater as a witness. In 5 of them, body cam footage was requested but never presented. And Craftoff overruled each objection every time." The name felt like a punch. Evelyn's hands stilled. "Judge Craftoff," she said, voice low. "He was my mentor. He was the one who encouraged me to pursue the bench. He called me the future of Charleston justice." Jordan leaned back in his chair. "Apparently, he was also the firewall protecting its past." For a long time, nobody spoke. Then Evelyn stood. She walked to the bookshelf behind her desk, fingers brushing over spines she'd known for decades. Titles on civil rights, constitutional law, judicial ethics. And yet none of them had prepared her for the moment when she'd realized the system she swore to uphold had been slowly rotting beneath her feet. "When did we stop seeing people?" she asked softly, almost to herself. "When did protecting the institution become more important than protecting the people it's meant to serve?" Naomi met her gaze. "You didn't stop seeing them, Judge. That's why you're still standing." Just then, a knock rattled the chamber door. Marcus opened it to find a young courthouse clerk, pale and breathless. "Judge Brooks, I think you need to see this." He handed over a yellow envelope. No return address, no label. Inside, a photograph. It showed Danielle Hayes, an investigative journalist Evelyn had once shared coffee with after a civil liberties panel. In the photo, Danielle stood outside the police evidence storage unit from the same week she'd vanished. She had been found days later slumped in her car. The cause of death, ruled an overdose. But Danielle didn't use drugs. Evelyn remembered her exact words. "I stay sharp because I dig in dangerous places." Evelyn passed the photo to Naomi and Jordan. Jordan's brow furrowed. "We pulled some of Danielle's last digital submissions to her editor. She'd flagged a series of missing internal audits. They're tied to Slater and Kent." "Danielle knew," Naomi murmured. "She got close. Too close." "They silenced her," Evelyn said flatly. "Just like they've done to every civilian, every youth, every voice that tried to shout through the noise." Jordan spoke again, this time slower, as if every word needed to be earned. "Danielle submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for body cam footage from a 2019 arrest. The footage vanished. She connected it to ADA Kent's office. And then, the car accident." Naomi turned to Evelyn. "Do you want to pursue this formally?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. I want to open every door they thought they locked. She walked to her desk, pulled open the bottom drawer, and retrieved a slim red binder. Her personal archive of questionable cases, inconsistencies she had flagged over the years, but never had enough evidence to challenge. She slid it across the table. I've seen the patterns, she said. Now I want names. Marcus finally spoke, voice quiet but resolute. We'll back you, ma'am, whatever comes. That night, Evelyn convened an emergency closed-door meeting with Naomi, Jordan, and a federal auditor from the DOJ. Evidence began to flow like water. Falsified reports, disciplinary records altered under ADA Kent's supervision, and a private security firm in Atlanta that had been laundering body cam footage, its name tied to donations to the Charleston Police Benevolent Fund. The final blow came from a bank statement Jordan uncovered, a $15,000 transfer to an offshore account under Kent's brother's name. The note read, "Protect the source." By morning, the team had assembled a network map stretching across Evelyn's wall, a twisted web of names, case files, photographs, sealed transcripts, and arrows connecting judges, officers, prosecutors, and power brokers. At the center, blinking in red, Derek Slater. Below him, Bradley Kent, Captain Whitaker, and Judge Hal Craftoft. Beside them, Danielle Hayes, circled in bold black ink. Evelyn stared at the wall, hands folded behind her back, the rising sun streaking through the blinds behind her. I was taught to believe the system works if you play by the rules, she said quietly. But the people who wrote those rules never imagined someone like me would hold the pen. Naomi crossed her arms. So what now? Evelyn turned, her voice steel. Now? We rewrite everything. The sun was setting over Charleston when Judge Evelyn Brooks returned to her chambers. The marble floor outside the courtroom was quiet now, the earlier tension of the day hanging in the air like a thundercloud waiting to burst. Evelyn moved slowly, her heels clicking with deliberation, the red welt on her cheek barely visible beneath her makeup, but still burning like a brand. On her desk sat a small brown envelope with no return address. Her name was printed in block letters across the front in black ink. No postage, no markings. She didn't need Marcus to tell her someone had slipped it in personally. She stared at it for a long time. Then she opened it. Inside was a photograph, crisp, glossy, clearly recent. Her nephew, Miles, age 11. He was walking home from school, alone, his backpack slung across one shoulder. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. On the back of the photo, someone had scrawled in the thick red marker, "Nice kid. Would be a shame if something happened." Her hand clenched the photo so tightly it bent at the corners. For a full minute, she didn't breathe. Then she reached for her phone. "Marcus," she said when her longtime bailiff answered. "Get in here. Now." Marcus Hill arrived in under a minute, his tall frame filling the doorway, eyes immediately scanning the room for danger. She handed him the photo silently. He stared at it. Then his jaw set. "They've crossed a line," he said quietly. "They were already on the wrong side of it," Evelyn replied. "But now they've dragged my family into it. I'll pull Miles out of school myself if I have to." Evelyn shook her head. "You'll get in touch with someone we can trust. Someone from the outside." Marcus understood immediately. "You want the feds?" "I want this out of Charleston's hands," she said. "Call Naomi Clark. Tell her I need to meet immediately." An hour later, Judge Evelyn Brooks sat across from Agent Naomi Clark and Agent Jordan Vega in a sealed conference room deep inside the courthouse. Agent Clark's eyes narrowed as she studied the photo. "This isn't subtle," she muttered. "It's not meant to be," Evelyn replied. "It's a message. They want me scared. They want me silent." Clark glanced at Vega, who was already working his tablet, pulling up encrypted surveillance footage and combing through courthouse access logs. "It's a miracle we caught this in time," Clark said. "You do realize, Judge, that the next step won't be a warning." "I'm well aware," Evelyn said, "which is why I'm requesting immediate federal protection. For myself, for my family, and I want this entire case elevated." Clark nodded slowly. "You'll have it. I'll coordinate with the U.S. Marshals by dawn." Vega looked up from his screen. We're tracing the origin of that photo now. Facial recognition is running on the street image. If there's any surveillance near the school, we'll find who took it. Evelyn stood, her voice low but resolute. And when you do, I want that person in custody before the sun sets. Outside, the halls of the courthouse remained quiet, but a storm was rising behind the walls. By the next morning, two black SUVs from the U.S. Marshal Service were stationed discreetly near Evelyn's home in Mount Pleasant. A plainclothes officer walked miles to school, while another shadowed Evelyn's sister's house from a nondescript sedan parked across the street. The message had been sent, but Evelyn had responded with one of her own. You do not intimidate a woman who survived more than you can imagine. At the courthouse, she convened a confidential strategy meeting with Naomi Clark, Jordan Vega, and Marcus Hill. We have a preliminary report, Vega began. Whoever took that photo has ties to a private security firm based in Atlanta. The firm has no official contracts in South Carolina, but it does have a history: clandestine work, black bag jobs, hired intimidation, the kind that doesn't show up on the books. Clark added, their name appeared in a 2019 corruption probe linked to a PAC that donated heavily to Charleston's mayoral campaign. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. So we're dealing with city politics, law enforcement, and now private contractors? Vega nodded. And there's more. We found a second threat. He turned his screen to her. It was a screenshot of an email sent to a local news station. It read, if you're wondering why Judge Evelyn Brooks is making all this noise, you might want to look into her past. Ask her why her husband really died. Ask her about the rulings she buried. You don't want to support a fraud. No sender. Routed through several proxy servers. But the intention was clear. Character assassination, distraction, deflection. They're getting desperate, Clark said. No, Evelyn replied calmly. They're showing us who they really are. The walls are closing in, and they're lashing out. She looked to Clark. Push the investigation forward, publicly. Quiet investigations are how they got away with it for years. Let them know we're coming. By noon, Clark and Vega had met with a U.S. attorney to formally open a federal corruption inquiry. Evelyn submitted a sworn affidavit detailing the intimidation, the photograph, and the historical protection of Officer Derek Slater by Ada Bradley Kent and Chief Walter Griggs. She was done playing defense. A few hours later, Evelyn received an anonymous envelope at her home. Inside was a single slip of paper. No message, just a name. Danielle Hayes. She froze. Danielle had been a journalist. Bright, young, determined. Evelyn remembered her vividly. She'd written a series of pieces 2 years ago investigating misuse of force cases involving Officer Slater. Then suddenly, she stopped. A few months later, she was found dead, ruled an overdose. Closed case. Evelyn handed the paper to Marcus. Find everything she ever published, she said. Everything she ever touched. I want to know why her name's coming up now. That night, Clark and Vega returned with something new. We pulled internal review files, Vega said. Danielle Hayes submitted an FOIA request to the DA's office 6 weeks before her death. She was looking into a connection between body cam footage disappearing and cases that never made it to court. And, Evelyn asked. And that request was denied, Clark said. But her name shows up in an internal memo written by ADA Bradley Kent. The memo marked her as a person of concern. Evelyn felt her stomach turn. They killed her. We can't prove that yet, Clark said, but I'm beginning to think they buried more than evidence. Evelyn stared at the file in front of her. A quiet fire lit in her chest. They had warned her, threatened her, tried to scare her into silence. Now they were resurrecting ghosts to break her. But instead, they were waking the part of her that had nothing left to lose. This is war, she said softly, and I won't blink. By the end of the week, the DOJ had officially designated Evelyn's courtroom as a protected federal witness site. Armed marshals screened visitors. Every hearing was monitored. Every staff member was vetted. And Evelyn? She never missed a day on the bench. Every ruling, every statement, every decision she made was a direct affront to the system that had tried to break her. But she stood tall, not out of defiance, but out of duty. And with every step forward, the network that protected Officer Slater began to unravel. Because no amount of threats could silence a woman who stood for truth, not when she carried the weight of history on her shoulders and the future of justice in her hands. The morning sun cast a pale glow over Charleston as Judge Evelyn Brooks entered the courthouse, her steps measured and resolute. The weight of recent events pressed heavily upon her, but her determination remained unshaken. She had faced threats, intimidation, and attempts to silence her, yet she stood firm, a beacon of justice in a city teetering on the edge of corruption. Officer Derek Slater, once a symbol of unchecked authority, had crossed a line that could no longer be ignored. His latest attempt to intimidate Judge Brooks had not only failed, but had also provided the final piece of evidence needed to bring him down. The U.S. Marshals, acting on a federal warrant, moved swiftly. As Slater exited his vehicle that morning, he was met by a team of marshals. Their presence was unyielding, their purpose clear. Slater's smug demeanor faltered as he realized the gravity of the situation. The cuffs clicked into place, a stark contrast to the freedom he had long abused. News of Slater's arrest spread rapidly, igniting a chain reaction throughout the city's justice system. Those who had once operated in the shadows found themselves under scrutiny. Ada Bradley Kent, known for his calculated maneuvers to shield corrupt officers, was summoned for questioning. His connections to Slater, once assets, now served as liabilities. Chief Walter Griggs, a man more concerned with public perception than justice, faced mounting pressure. His attempts to downplay the situation only fueled public outcry. The community demanded transparency, accountability, and change. Judge Brooks, alongside agents Naomi Clark and Jordan Vega, spearheaded the investigations. Their efforts uncovered a web of deceit, revealing doctored reports, suppressed evidence, and a culture of silence that had allowed corruption to flourish. The courtroom became a stage for reckoning. Witnesses came forward, emboldened by the fall of Slater. Testimonies painted a grim picture of systemic abuse, but also highlighted the resilience of those who had suffered in silence. Danielle Hayes, the investigative journalist whose relentless pursuit of the truth had cost her dearly, was posthumously honored. Her work had laid the foundation for the current proceedings, and her legacy served as a reminder of the power of truth. As the trials progressed, the city's faith in its institutions began to mend. Reforms were proposed, oversight committees established, and a new era of accountability dawned. Judge Brooks, unwavering in her commitment, continued to preside over the proceedings, ensuring that justice was not only served, but also seen to be served. Amazon. She reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. It showed a black and white photo of her own mother in 1965, standing outside a voting center in Birmingham, defiant and proud. "She stood for me," Evelyn whispered, "and now I've stood for you." The collapse of the corrupt network signaled a new beginning for Charleston. While the scars of the past remained, the city's future was now shaped by integrity, transparency, and the unwavering courage of those who dared to stand against injustice. The morning of the public hearing arrived not with chaos, but with eerie calm. Outside the Charleston courthouse, a sea of reporters, protesters, victims' families, and curious citizens buzzed with anticipation. Handwritten signs demanding justice waved beneath the gray southern sky. Accountability now. No more cover-ups. We stand with Evelyn Brooks. Judge Evelyn Brooks stood in her chambers, not in her robe, but in a tailored navy suit. Her posture was straight, her eyes steady. There was no makeup to conceal the fading bruise on her cheek, a mark left by Officer Derek Slater that had become a symbol of a much deeper wound. Her hands rested atop a leather-bound folder filled with sealed complaints, investigative reports, redacted emails, and sworn affidavits. Documents many in power had fought to bury. Today she would dig them up and place them before the public like evidence on a courtroom floor. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Your Honor?" Marcus Hill asked from the doorway, his voice steady but low. Evelyn turned to her long-trusted bailiff. "Marcus, they sent me a picture of my nephew walking home from school. They want me afraid, but I won't give them that. Not today." He gave a nod, then stepped aside to allow Agent Naomi Clark and Agent Jordan Vega into the room. "We've secured the hearing room," Naomi said. "Federal observers are present. Media access is restricted to vetted outlets. You'll have eyes across the country within the hour." Jordan handed her a flash drive. "Everything we've compiled so far is on here. Recordings, logs, documents, all admissible, all authenticated." Evelyn held the drive in her hand like it was a blade. "I'm not just presenting evidence today," she said, her voice cool, steady. "I'm putting a system on trial." By 10 a.m., the main courtroom was packed beyond its limits. Court staff had opened the overflow gallery to accommodate media crews, legal observers, civil rights advocates, and ordinary citizens who had come to see what no Charleston courtroom had ever dared show. The gavel sounded not from a judge's hand, but from a staff coordinator announcing the commencement of a special judicial review. As Evelyn walked into the chamber, the room fell silent. She moved with purpose, not to the bench, but to a standing microphone at the center of the courtroom. The seal of the South Carolina Judicial Commission loomed behind her, flanked by 2 federal observers. Microphones clicked, cameras rolled, and Evelyn Brooks, standing under the weight of history, took a breath. "My name is Judge Evelyn Brooks," she began. "For the past 35 years, I have served the city of Charleston as a public defender, a prosecutor, and finally as a circuit court judge. I believed in the rule of law. I still do. But the law must answer for what it has allowed." She paused. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It pulsed with tension. "On the morning of April 11th, I was assaulted by Officer Derek Slater inside this very courthouse. But this hearing is not about a slap. It's about what that slap exposed." She opened the leather folder and removed the first document. "This," she said, holding up a printout, "is a 2019 civilian complaint filed against Officer Slater by a 17-year-old named Terrence Duvall. The boy alleged excessive force during a routine traffic stop. His injuries included 2 cracked ribs, a broken nose, and a concussion. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence, but the body cam footage was never reviewed because it was accidentally erased." She held up a second sheet. "This is the IT request to delete the footage, signed by Captain Alan Whitaker, Slater's then supervisor. That same captain is now collecting a city pension after quietly retiring last year. No charges, no internal review." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras turned toward each other. Names were being named. The foundation was shaking. Evelyn placed both pages onto the public record table and continued. "This next one," she said, voice catching slightly, "is the personnel file of Danielle Hayes, a local journalist who requested access to sealed complaints involving Officer Slater and ADA Bradley Kent. Danielle's request was denied. 2 weeks later, she was found dead in her car. The cause of death was ruled an overdose, despite her toxicology report showing no history of drug use." A sob broke from the gallery. A woman stood, clutching a framed photo. "She was my sister," she cried. "She didn't do drugs. She didn't deserve to die." Evelyn looked at her, eyes full of sorrow. "No, she didn't." She turned back to the room. Danielle had compiled dozens of cases involving the same officers, the same prosecutors, the same patterns: excessive force, missing evidence, unfiled charges, closed complaints, and coerced plea deals, many involving young black defendants. Then she looked squarely at the panel of federal observers. "I request that this evidence be submitted to a federal oversight board and the U.S. Department of Justice for immediate investigation. I am also recommending that Officer Derek Slater be charged with not only the assault against me, but obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and abuse of power." The observers nodded. One of them, an older black man from the DOJ, leaned into his mic and said, "Request acknowledged. All submitted material will be entered into federal review." Evelyn wasn't done. She turned to the next document. "This is a series of internal emails between Ada Bradley Kent and Chief Walter Griggs. In them, you will find discussions of how to minimize exposure to police misconduct cases, steer journalists away, and avoid drawing heat to officers like Slater. One message from Kent reads, Keep Judge Brooks in check. She's been asking too many questions. A collective intake of breath echoed. She placed the emails beside the others. These were men trusted to uphold the law, she said, her voice now rising. And instead, they conspired to bury the truth. But not anymore. She turned to the gallery, her eyes blazing. This is about dignity. This is about what happens when power becomes a shield instead of a responsibility. When a badge becomes a weapon and silence becomes the system's currency. She reached into the folder and pulled out one final sheet, her prepared statement. She placed it on the podium, but didn't look down at it. Let me speak plainly now. I am not a symbol. I am a woman, a black woman, a public servant who chose justice, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. And what I've seen in this city, what I've endured, should never happen in a nation that claims to value equality under the law. She glanced at the young black boys in the audience, at the grieving families, at the white citizens who looked away when her gaze met theirs. We cannot heal what we will not name. So I name it now: systemic failure, institutional bias, generational complicity. I name the prosecutors who protected the guilty, the officers who terrorized the innocent, the judges who looked the other way, and I name myself for being silent too long. A tear slid down her cheek. I will no longer be silent. Applause erupted, not polite, not measured. A roar of federal agents moved to take the evidence into secure custody. Reporters surged forward. The press conference had just begun, but the public hearing had already done what centuries of legal whitewash hadn't: brought truth into the light. Evelyn stepped back from the podium and walked toward Marcus Hill, who was waiting quietly near the doors. "You all right, Judge?" he asked. She looked back one last time at the evidence table, at the room standing on its feet, at a city staring directly into its reflection for the first time in decades. "I am now," she said. Then she walked out, leaving the echo of her words ringing in the hearts of everyone present. The aftermath of Judge Evelyn Brooks's public hearing was seismic. Her revelations had not only exposed systemic corruption, but also ignited a fervent demand for justice across Charleston. However, the entrenched powers were not ready to relinquish control without a fight. Within days, a coordinated media campaign emerged, aiming to discredit Judge Brooks. Anonymous sources leaked fabricated stories to local outlets, painting her as a radical with a personal vendetta. Headlines questioned her impartiality, and op-eds suggested she had overstepped her judicial boundaries. Despite the onslaught, Evelyn remained composed. She had anticipated retaliation and had meticulously prepared. With the assistance of agents Naomi Clark and Jordan Vega, she compiled a comprehensive dossier of evidence countering the false narratives. This included authenticated documents, recorded conversations, and testimonies from credible witnesses. Evelyn held a press conference, presenting the dossier to the public. She addressed each accusation with clarity, dismantling the smear campaign piece by piece. Her unwavering stance further solidified public support, and the tide began to turn against those attempting to undermine her. However, Evelyn understood that true change required more than personal vindication. She recognized that her continued presence on the bench might become a distraction, hindering the reform movement she had ignited. After deep reflection, she made the difficult decision to resign from her judicial position. In her resignation speech, delivered before a packed courtroom and broadcast nationwide, Evelyn stated, "Change doesn't need a monument, it needs momentum." She emphasized that her departure was not a retreat, but a strategic move to allow the focus to remain on systemic reform rather than individual battles. Evelyn's resignation sent shockwaves through the legal community. Her courage and integrity inspired a new generation of activists, lawyers, and judges committed to upholding justice. The movement she had sparked continued to grow, driven by the momentum she had so selflessly prioritized. The sun hung low over Mount Pleasant as Judge Evelyn Brooks stood quietly on her porch, the Atlantic breeze rustling the tall marsh grass beyond the backyard. It had been 3 weeks since her resignation. Her name was still on the front pages, still spoken in reverent tones by civil rights leaders and whispered in caution by those who once pulled the strings of Charleston's justice machine. But here, Surrounded by birdsong and the familiar creak of wood beneath her feet, she was simply Aunt Evelyn again. Her nephew, 13-year-old Malcolm, rode up the gravel driveway, his backpack slung loosely over one shoulder and his bike tires coated with dust. He dropped the kickstand and sprinted up the steps. "Aunt Evelyn!" he called out. She turned, arms wide, and caught him in a firm embrace. It was one of those silent moments that needed no words. She had weathered storms in courtrooms, faced down threats from men in suits and shadows alike. But this was what made it all worth it. "I saw you on TV," Malcolm said into her shoulder. "Everyone at school's talking about you." Evelyn pulled back slightly, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "And what are they saying?" "That you made them listen," he said. "That you stood up when it was hard." She smiled gently, eyes glistening. "I didn't just do it for me, baby. I did it for you. So maybe when you grow up, you won't have to prove you belong in the room." They sat together on the porch swing as the sky turned lavender. From inside the house came the scent of collard greens and cornbread. Comfort food, the kind that tied generations together like thread through time. Marcus Hill had stopped by earlier, delivering a letter from Agent Naomi Clark. Department of Justice investigations were underway. Subpoenas had been issued. Whispers were now confessions, and walls once impenetrable had begun to crumble. "Are you going back?" Malcolm asked quietly. "No," Evelyn said, "but I'm not done. The work doesn't end just because I hung up the robe." He nodded, the weight of her words settling in his young mind. She reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. It showed a black and white photo of her own mother in 1965, standing outside a voting center in Birmingham, defiant and proud. "She stood for me," Evelyn whispered, "and now I've stood for you." They sat in silence, two generations bound by courage and clarity. In that moment, Evelyn Brooks wasn't a former judge or a headline. She was a legacy, not carved in stone, but lived in quiet resilience and passed forward, like truth whispered into the ears of those willing to hear it. Change didn't need a monument, it needed momentum, and Evelyn Brooks had given it exactly that. The story of Judge Evelyn Brooks carries profound lessons that resonate deeply, especially for older audiences who have lived through decades of social change. It reminds us that justice is not guaranteed. It must be protected and pursued, even in the face of fear, retaliation, or personal risk. Evelyn's quiet strength, her unwavering moral compass, and her refusal to be silenced are a testament to the power of integrity. For seniors who have seen injustice come in many forms, her courage offers hope that it's never too late to challenge corruption, to stand up for what's right, and to protect the generations that follow. This story also teaches that legacy isn't built through titles or status, but through action and sacrifice. Evelyn stepped down from the bench, but her impact only grew. Because real change doesn't need a monument, it needs momentum. Her example encourages all of us to use our voice, our wisdom, and our experience to guide the world toward truth, even when it's hard. Judge Evelyn Brooks stepped away from the bench, not in defeat, but with dignity, leaving behind a legacy of courage, truth, and unshakable resolve. Her story is a powerful reminder that real justice begins when good people refuse to stay silent. If this story moved you, inspired you, or gave you hope, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Thank you for watching, and remember, truth doesn't need a spotlight. It needs a voice.